Chapter 18. Memnarch's body hummed in anticipation. Every cell, every molecule of metal and flesh combined wanted more serum. No, they needed more serum. Drinking in giant quaffs from a large mug, the Guardian of Mirrodin leaned over the controls of the Darksteel eye. When he had built the eye, he assumed he would always have his infusion device. Consequently, the viewing chamber was too small for him to fit inside while wearing his serum tanks. It had been a miscalculation. Images buzzed around him. Each of the 8 different screens showed him a view through the eyes of his mirror. Right now, he was unconcerned with all of it, except for the unfolding events in the Mephidros. Capturing the elf was his priority. The rest of the plane could wait, just as he had waited. Through the eyes of his spy, he watched the elf girl and her friends evade the centipede and scurry into the tunnel. Memnarch had watched that interaction, barely taking a breath. There would be no end to the torture he would unleash on the denizens of the Dross if she were killed in the swamp. Damn this frustration. If only he could lay his hands on her. If only it were in his original body he created. The perfect body. Then he would be able to chase her himself. But alas, he was not. He was cursed to have this saggy, fleshing monstrosity that served no other purpose except as a vessel for his greatness. With it, there was only one thing he could do in the search for the elf. Watch and wait. Each time his servants had her cornered, the elf had managed to escape. That would not be the case this time. Now, as his mirror stalked behind its quarry, Memnarch was much relieved. She only needed to step through the end of the passage, and he would have her in his grasp. Glissa and Bosch fished Slobad from the underground lake. His body was mostly limp, but he was coughing up swamp water, so the elf figured he was still alive. Looking up one last time at the disorientated centipede, Glissa dodged into the passage with the rest of the group, the goblin in tow. An eerie yellow glow from the large chamber behind them didn't seep too far into the tunnel. About 100 yards in, everything was dark. "Anybody have a dry torch?" said Glissa. Suddenly the passage lit up with a cool blue glow. In front of the elf, Brenna and 2 of her wizards held their arms out in the air. In their outstretched palms, each held a small glowing ball of light, about the size of a baby squirrel. It wasn't much, but it did the trick. "That's better." Glissa scanned the tunnel. It was large enough to accommodate the iron golem, although his head occasionally touched the roof, depending on how much sludge had collected on the floor. The walls were covered in a slimy film that reminded her of the sludge she'd swum through to get to the bottom of the swamp. Looking down at her hands, the same shiny slime was attached to everything on her. The lines of her hands were set in deep black, and her skin looked as if it belonged to someone twice her age. "I don't think I can remember the last time I was clean." The group continued on, following a series of twists and turns. Al-Hayat had a hard time keeping his balance. His paws kept slipping in slime, and his claws made a screeching sound when they ground across the metal pipe beneath. Finally, the passage straightened out, and a clear white light filled the tunnel from the other end. It wasn't bright or harsh, but it was certainly more powerful than the dull blue glow from Brenna's spell. Seeing the new light reminded Glissa of exiting the blue lacuna. That time she had stepped from the tunnel to find a whole new world, one that she had thought was the stuff of legends, but was in fact real. Now she wondered what new thing she was going to find when she stepped out into that light. She didn't know if it was possible for an entire world to be turned upside down again. But even the thought made her stop where she stood. "What is wrong?" asked Bosch. The deep, resonant bass of his voice woke the sleeping Slobad. The goblin rubbed his eyes and leaped down, standing beside the elf. Glissa shrugged. "Last time we stepped from a tunnel like this, I discovered a hollow world. What will I find this time?" Al-Hayat had turned and come back to join the conversation. Is finding out something new such a bad thing? No, not always, but I didn't find you at the end of a tube. The wolf laughed. So everything at the end of a tube is bad? Glissa shrugged. I don't know. This is only my second tube. Al-Hayat stuck his muzzle against her back and urged her forward. Maybe this one won't be so bad. Brenna appeared, her glowing blue ball now extinguished. Don't be so sure. Glissa looked up at each of her friends in turn. She'd come this far. No reason to stop now. Steeling herself, she stepped forward and out of the tunnel. She was greeted by the back of a tall, bright metal throne, sitting on a multi-tiered dais. The walls of the chamber were of a dark, etched metal that looked as if it had been eaten away by acid or something worse. Stepping out from behind the throne, Glissa spotted a pair of exceptionally tall double doors. They were closed at the moment, and they glowed around the edges with a magical red light. I've been here before, she said. The others filed from the tunnel. Slabad stepped up beside the elf, sticking close. Glissa walked up to the dais and touched the cushion on the seat of the throne. We're in the Vault of Whispers. This is Gef's chamber. The double doors swung open. A rush of fog flooded in, spreading out over the floor like a wave, filling up the room from corner to corner. Behind the fog, a pale, human-looking man stepped into the room. His bald head shone under the warm light. A strip of metal ran over his forehead and down the back of his neck, disappearing into the folds of his grey robe. So nice to see you again, young Glissa, said the man as he entered. You really shouldn't drop in so unexpectedly. Glissa pulled her sword from its sheath. Hello, Geth. I hope that our visit this time won't be as unpleasant as our last. Don't be so hard on yourself, moving around the wall, getting deeper into the chamber without getting any closer to Glissa. I quite enjoyed our last visit. Glissa watched the strange, gaunt man as he circled in the room. Yeah, I'll bet. So, tell me, how's your vampire? Geth visibly bristled. Fine, fine. Bran and her wizards entered the room. They stood against the wall opposite to Geth. And yet? Geth frowned. I'm afraid Yurt is no longer with us. Glissa stepped down from the dais. What did you do to him? Geth continued around the wall, but stopped when he saw Al-Hayat come out from behind the throne. The leader of the vault held up his hands. Nothing, I swear. Then where is he? Geth eyed Al-Hayat one more time. Then Bosch stepped out beside the wolf. He glanced from the pair back to the human wizard, then panned over to Glissa. He met with a tragic accident. Accident? Geth nodded. Turns out he wasn't much of a handler after all. He held his hands out wide and shrugged. I gave him a new reaper as you requested, but the poor man got caught within its grasp only a few hours after you left here. Glissa felt the bile inside her rise to the surface. If you... She took a menacing step forward, but Geth held out his finger, waving it side to side. You didn't come here to check on Yurt, young Glissa. So, why don't you tell me what it is you require? And perhaps we can speed your visit here. Glissa stopped, but she gripped the hilt of her sword tightly in both hands. Taking a deep breath, she calmed herself. All right, Geth. She held up her hand, showing him the ring the troll had given her. I need the last piece to the Cauldron Guardian. Geth took a step back. My, that's no small request. Glissa narrowed her eyes. What is it that you're angling for, Geth? The pale man smiled. Angling for? There is nothing that you have that I desire. Besides, I do owe you for sparing the life of my vampire. The elf cocked her head to one side. Geff seemed entirely too happy to see her, and even more happy to be helpful. This isn't right. What is it that is amusing you so much? Amusing me? Geff's smile widened. I'm just enjoying the irony of this. The last time you were here, you stormed in, cut the arm of my vampire, demanded I tell you who was ransoming your life, then absconded with my vial of serum. He held his hand to his face, trying to hide the smile behind, but it was no use. He began to laugh. Now you need my help. Isn't that grand? Yes, grand, Geff. Glissa was growing impatient. So tell me where the last piece is, or this time it won't be a vampire who loses a limb. Geff tried to swallow his laughter, but he couldn't. He held his finger in the air and began taking deep breaths in an effort to calm himself. Don't you see the beauty in all of this? It's like a cycle of life. First you are nothing, then you are born. You live your life and then you die. Geff rubbed his hands together. If you're lucky, you'll end up here in the dross, continuing to be productive in the unlife. If you're not, that is, you're nothing again. A chill ran down Gus's spine. This was not right. Looking back, she could tell Brianna and her wizards were feeling the same thing. On the other side of the throne, Al-Hayat too was uncomfortable, shifting his gaze from side to side, keeping himself hunched and ready to pounce. Beside her, Slobad crouched near the ground. He looked tired, almost distracted. The plunge into the lake must have taken more out of him this time. Only Bosch seemed unfazed by the strange situation. Then again, Bosch's expression was always stoic, neither happy nor sad. All right, Geff, said Glissa, raising her sword again and taking 2 large steps towards the pale man. You can laugh about this all you want when we're gone. Geff pressed himself tight up against the wall, his eyes bulging. Glissa moved in closer, letting the tip of her blade hover just below his throat. Tell me where the last piece is. What makes you think I'll just hand it over? Only this. Glissa whipped the tip of her blade over the gaunt man's cheek, drawing a thick line of red blood. Geff squealed and pulled his hands up, covering the fresh wound. The look of horror and betrayal on his face was plain. I spared your life once, but at the moment, I'm not in such a generous mood. She looked down at herself, covered in muck. I've been through too much. Haven't slept or eaten, and I don't trust you. On this last word, she shoved the tip of her blade again at Geff, punctuating her point. Okay. Geff held his hands up in surrender. I'll show you. The ruler of the vault placed his fingers to his lips and let out a high-pitched whistle. The acid-etched walls of his chamber tipped forward, as if an invisible giant had been holding them up and had now let go. Glissa grabbed Geff by the collar of his robe and pulled him back, out from that falling wall. As she pulled back, the Lord of the Vault slipped from her grasp and disappeared in the swirling fog. As the walls collapsed in, everyone else charged towards the center of the room, piling onto the dais. There was barely enough space, and Bosch was forced to climb on top of the throne. With everyone collected safely from the way in the center of the room, the walls fell with a tremendous clang, pushing before them a gust of wind. The fog that had blown in with Geff was pushed back into the air, and the companions were surrounded by a dense ring of opaque whiteness. What have you done, Geff? She shouted over the gloom. The leader of the vault cackled, his voice coming from far away. Only completed the circle. Everyone stood on guard, straining to see. The fog began to settle again, slowly drooping to the floor. As it descended, objects began to take shape, tall and narrow. They looked at first like human-sized statues. The fog clung to them as it fell, making the figures seem to rise up from the floor. Then one of them moved. Hello, elf, said the voice that sounded mute and far away as if it were underwater. Brianna raised her hands, magical energies playing between them, Vidalcan! Pontifex watched the walls of guest chamber fall. A thick fog lifted into the air, obscuring his view. Marek, are your troops in place? Yes, my lord, replied the head of the guard. He held a glowing halberd in the crook of one arm, and in his other hand he gripped an old-fashioned trident. Excellent! He rubbed two of his forehands together. Now we wait and see if our friend Geth has come through. As the wall settled fully to the ground with a loud clap, an island rose from the fog in the centre of what used to be Geth's private chamber. Clinging to that island like a pile of rats atop a sinking ship were the elf and her companions. Hello, elf, said the Pontifex. He took a step forward. Atop the island, a pair of hands cloaked in magical energies rose into the air. Pontifex heard someone say Vidalcan. Then a jagged bolt of blue lightning shot out and enveloped a warrior standing next to him. He turned to Marek to give an order to charge, but his bodyguard and commander to the Vidalcan guards had already moved in. For though most of the fog had cleared, it still clung to the floor, obscuring from view the bottom half of the onrushing warriors. They held their charged lances high above them as they ran. The glowing heads lit up the shifting white cloud below, washing out every colour in the spectrum and replacing it with a pale blue. In the next second, Pontifex's warriors tore into the huddling mass in the middle of the room. Metal clashed against metal. The sounds of flesh tearing and bones breaking drifted over the fog, like a lilting horn. The flash of blue-headed halberds cast over exotic shadows on the white cloud, and Pontifex came one step closer to acquiring his prize. It's a trap, shouted Glissa, steeling herself for a charge. Brenna had already reacted, sending a jagged shot of power into the foggy distance. What had appeared to be statues were Vidalcan warriors. The fog obscured most of their bodies, but Glissa could clearly see the glowing heads of their magically tipped halberds. They seemed to float on the cloud, casting a pale blue glow as they came. It was strangely calm in colour. The warriors were upon them, and Glissa had no more time to ponder the beauty of the killing blades. Magic arced out from the die, crashing into the oncoming warriors. Several fell, but the rest came on, and Glissa launched herself forward, her blade biting into Vidalcan flesh. The fog on the floor swirled up and around the combatants. Blades clashed and sparks flew. Spells were cast and warriors were frozen in place. Nowhere on the die was safe from the assault, and in seconds the entire group was surrounded. Glissa's blade sang as it cut the thick, dank air. With one swing she'd cut cleanly through the shaft of a Vidalcan halberd. With the next she cut down the warrior holding the two halves. Standing where she was, she couldn't see the rest of her friends. Occasionally she would catch a glimpse of the blue magic flying towards Vidalcan warriors, or hear Al-Hayat's growl. Even if she had time to turn back and check on Slobodan Bosch, she doubted she'd be able to see them through all the fog. Kicking aside the dying warrior before her, the elf turned to the next vague figure looming in the wispy white cloud. The head of his charged halberd came into view, and Glissa sped up her swing, barely able to block the attack before it smashed into her shoulder. Spinning away, she came around onto the balls of her feet. The head of the halberd came at her again, but this time she was prepared and she battered it away with ease, but a sharp pain blossomed in her thigh. The halberd blade had been a feint. Looking down, Glissa saw the head of a trident pull back into the obscurity of the fog. Drawing air for her clenched teeth, Glissa took a step back, the stinging burn of her fresh wound causing her to limp. The trident had punched 3 deep holes in her leg, and they wept blood. The entire left side of her body was beginning to ache. She couldn't fight like this. She needed to heal herself. Glancing over her shoulder, she looked for some help. There was none in sight, only a swirling cloud of white and jags of blue magic. Her only chance was to try and duck back into the fog, hide herself long enough to heal her leg. Just as this thought flashed through her head, the warrior she had been fighting stepped out of the fog. The Vidalcan Brenner had called Marek. He held a glowing halberd in one hand and a short, sharp trident in the other. The tips of the trident were shiny, and though the blue glow of the Vidalcan's lance was washing out the colour, Glissa knew it was her blood tipping the tines. Marek wasted no time, bringing his halberd down in a chopping blow. Glissa battered it away, but her injured leg slowed her. Pain flared again in her thigh, and she watched the Vidalcan pull his trident for the second time from her wounded leg. Dropping to the ground, she pressed her back against the floor. The thick fog swirled up, concealing her from view. Pressing her sword tightly against her body, Glissa rolled to her right, hoping to mask her whereabouts. The sound of battle filled the air above her, and a heavy boot pounded the floor right beside her head. "He's found me," she thought. A chill ran up her spine, and panic flooded her veins. She had failed. Then the warrior who belonged to the boot moved on, and Glissa breathed a quick sigh of relief. Dropping her sword, the elf placed both of her hands on her injured left thigh. Even placing light pressure on the skin made the wound throb more, and Glissa winced. Taking a deep breath, she calmed her thoughts and drew in mana. Like the spell she had cast beneath the underground lake, this one only needed a small amount of the energies of the tangle. The rest she could improvise. Feeling the spell fully powered, Glissa pushed the arcane magic from her fingertips, flooding the healing warmth into her thigh. The pain subsided immediately, and Glissa closed her eyes, lost in a brief moment of painless bliss. Cold, sharpened steel pressed tightly against her throat. "I suggest you surrender," said a far-away, watery voice. Glissa opened her eyes and looked up at an image of herself reflected in the shiny surface of Marek's face mask.